All right, welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie Badinsky, and I am your host for today's exciting program. On Standing for Truth, we defend the truth of biblical creation. We also host some really awesome guests. And today we have another awesome guest to speak on an important topic, the fraud of human evolution. And so I am thrilled to have Dr. Carl Werner here to speak on this topic. Now, today's program will be the first of many. This is an ongoing series on fossil frauds, and so I'm excited. And it is going to demonstrate the collapse of evolution. The first two episodes are going to answer the question, did humans evolve from apes? Now, before I hand it over to my guest, Carl, I do want to give him a formal introduction for anybody who might be unfamiliar with him and his work. In his sophomore year of college, Dr. Carl Werner was challenged by a fellow classmate with these words: "I bet you can't prove evolution." Disturbed by his classmates' somewhat poignant criticisms of the theory, Dr. Werner, a biology major at this time, pondered this conversation for some time. From this point, he began his quest for an answer. Driven by his stringent scientific background and exceedingly curious nature, Dr. Werner read and researched every topic he could find on evolution, including paleontology, geology, biology, and biochemistry. After 18 years of study, from 1979 to 1997, Dr. Werner considered himself ready to begin a series of experiments by which to test evolution. It was his grand experiment to test the theory and determine its veracity. Over the next nearly 3 decades, 1997 till the present, Dr. Werner then traveled 298,000 miles to museums and dig sites around the globe, photographing thousands of original fossils in the actual fossil layers where they were found. In other words, you're more than equipped and qualified to speak on these topics. Carl, my brother, it's a pleasure to have you. And so before we begin, though, I wanted to ask you, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. This is so easy to talk to a group and don't have to leave my house. Yeah. I just think technology is fantastic. This is fantastic.
Amen. And you've done a lot of traveling, clearly, 300,000 miles, kilometers. And so now in 2024, you get to sit back, relax in your own home, and we get to hopefully reach thousands with the truth here, Carl. And so I want to hand it over to you and allow you to give us a brief introduction into how you discovered these fossil frauds. I think today we're going to be focusing a lot on the how, and it is going to be a comprehensive series. We're doing it live. And so to the audience, Carl is going to be going through quite a few visuals and an important presentation here. And so in the meantime, I'll be taking your questions. We'll be interacting with some of your comments and challenges. And so, Carl, I'm going to hand it over to you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Donnie. Tonight is maybe the biggest scientific news you will hear in your lifetime. And this news is that widespread fraud has been uncovered and documented in the field of human evolution. And when I say the word fraud, that means the scientist knew he was deceiving. It wasn't just a mistake. Now, we have documented 45,000 mistaken stone tools and bone tools. That's not what I'm talking about. And we've documented 232 overturned ape men. Those were mistakes. And we've documented scientists putting bones in the wrong positions. Those were mistakes. That's not what I'm talking about tonight. I'm talking about a scientist knowingly, purposefully carrying out a fraud in the field of human evolution for the purpose to create the idea that evolution works. Now, many people have suspected that ape men, that is, the theoretical evolutionary animals between apes and humans, were either frauds or lies or just made up stories. But since the fossils of ape men have been kept off limits, not only to the public, but to other scientists, it was impossible to verify that ape men were real. This process of hiding fossils has been going on since 1896, and it continues to today. 27 years ago, my wife and I embarked on a project to rectify this lack of access to filming fossils by forming a television documentary company and filming a series on human evolution for national television. During this time, we photographed hundreds of original ape-man fossils in the vaults of the museum basements and in the university vaults all over the world. In this process, we documented 150 acts of fraud. Now, this is not been heard of before. Most creationists and evolution scientists would say there was 2 frauds, Piltdown Man and Haeckel's embryos. But now it's jumped from 2 to 150 frauds. And the frauds involve the most common ape men. These aren't just esoteric, some one-off ape men. These are Lucy was a fraud. Neanderthal man involved fraud. Homo erectus, the Turkana boy, involved fraud. Homo habilis involved fraud. Australopithecus prometheus involved fraud. Toomai Zinjanthropus, and many, many others. Now that all these frauds have been unmasked, Darwin's theory of naturalism, that is, that everything came about naturally without the intervention of God, has been overturned. And I'll explain that shortly. But, these are very big claims that I'm making. And you would rightfully question me, who is this guy? How would he know? How could he get all this information and no one else has noticed it? Well, I'm also a doubting Thomas. I don't believe people when they're speaking. I'm always questioning that. And so I feel like it's important for you to understand my motivation, my technique, how we went about doing this. And then I'm going to start sharing the results, the frauds, one at a time. We'll probably only get through one actual fraud tonight, but then the next show, we will do all the other 149 if we have time. And they're stunning, and you've never heard of these. And now you may ask, why does this even matter, Carl Werner? What difference does it make if humans evolved from apes millions of years ago, or if we were created by God in the Garden of Eden just thousands of years ago? Who cares, Well, it matters a lot because this issue had a profound impact on my life as it played out as a teenager. And I'm sure that it's having the same effect on your children, your brothers, your friends. And it's just not a esoteric question. It has huge impacts for how we then live. This is how I reasoned as a teenager. Now, if the universe formed naturally from a big bang billions of years ago, and this would be just the interaction of atoms like hydrogen and helium atoms causing the Big Bang and the formation of the universe without God being needed for this. And if then life began naturally on the earth, like the earth was just chemicals, and then the first living thing, like a little bacteria, formed for the first time. And if that happened naturally, and then if all living things on earth evolved from that bacteria naturally, just through the origin of species, like hippos came from this bacteria, and humans and palm trees and avocados, then if all these things are true, there's a possibility that God does not exist. Now, this is Carl Werner, teenage, circa 15 years old, 14 years old. But then if God does not exist, then all these scriptures about God creating the earth in 6 days, thousands of years ago, was all made up. And if that is true, why do I even follow religion? I'm serious. This is it would be your logical next question. Why should I not go out and party and smoke and eat, drink, and be merry? Naturalism essentially makes the Bible into a scrap of paper, that it's the whole religion thing is just foolish. And you're a fool for following all these hard rules. But, and that's a big but, and hang on to your seats. You know, sometimes I play the devil's advocate here just to prompt you to think. But what if the opposite is true? And what if it was impossible for the universe to form naturally? And if it would be impossible for a living bacteria to come about from just chemicals interacting? And if it would be impossible for that bacteria to change into a human which has 20 trillion cells by accidental mutations? If these things are impossible, then it would point to a God who created the earth, the universe, and all living things on earth. And if that's true, and there's no choice, that there's no other way you could get all this that we see here around us, then you better figure out, I'm not barking at you, but I'm just saying, just figuratively, you better figure out who this creator is and what does he expect from you and how are we to live, because you then have been presented hard evidence that he does exist. This question is the most important question and trumps all other philosophical questions that you might have. And this is the linchpin for how you're going to live. And it also was my linchpin. Now, I'm going to show you some pictures of some physicians. Now, you might, and Donnie, I'll have you put this on the thing. You might ask, well, Carl Werner, you are a medical doctor. You know, how could a medical doctor even know anything about this topic of ape men, evolution? You know, you're treating sore throats. You know, the physicians have had a long history on either overturning ideas about evolution or promoting ideas about evolution, but the physicians are in there all over, but you don't realize they're physicians because they call them not physicians. They call them theorists and they call them anthropologists. The Christians call me a physician, but the evolution scientists call their physicians anthropologists, even though they don't have a degree in anthropology. For example, August Weismann overturned Darwin's law of disuse and use, and Francisco Redi, who was another physician, overturned the idea of spontaneous generation, which had been around from the time of Aristotle, and no one could disprove it. He was one of the first scientists that stood up, but he was a physician. And on the human evolution side, the pro-evolution side, all of these guys are physicians, like Raymond Dart, who discovered the tongue child, Robert Broom, who discovered Mrs. Ples, Eugene Du Bois, who discovered Homo erectus, and Davidson Black, a physician from Canada, who discovered the Peking man, all physicians. And another answer to this question, Carl, how do you have the authority to be even talking to us tonight, is that the many evolutionists are unprepared, and yet they have these high positions and make these definitive statements, and yet they don't have the training. For example, Charles Darwin has no science degree. He went to medical school and dropped out. And I graduated, by the way. And he wrote The Origin of Species, and yet his only college degree was in religion. Believe that or not, he learned how to be a pastor. And Richard Leakey, who discovered so many important fossils and was considered an anthropologist, he never went to college. And Florentino Ameghino, who discovered 5 ape men down in South America, he was a high school dropout. He only made it through 2 years of high school. And Van Rietveld, who discovered a bunch of stone tools down in South Africa, considered a paleoanthropologist. And he was a bridge builder. He was an architect kind of guy, an engineer. He had no science degree. So I have as much gravitas as anybody here on this page, just simply because I'm a physician, because the physicians by training have training in biology, anatomy, neuroanatomy, reproduction, genetics, statistics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's real easy to jump into the theory of evolution. So I'm going to jump off the screen share now, and I want to tell you my story, how I documented and came about to document the 150 frauds. And I'm going to take you back to the very beginning, which was my childhood. And I grew up in a Christian family, and I had amazing parents, and they were very moral, and they went to church every week, and they were good people. So there's nothing wrong with my parents. But our church did not teach that the Bible was inerrant, which now in retrospect, I think that's kind of odd. Creation was implied at my church, but six-day creation, a young earth, and Noah's flood were not ever taught formally. And evolution was certainly not discussed. And during high school, I think this was just me, I just found myself drifting away from God. It's like, why am I following all these family religious rules? Really? I mean, seriously, I couldn't really see that I was compelled to follow God because I had my doubts that he even existed. And by the time I reached medical school, and by the way, I got into medical school, I started when I was 18 years old, and it was an accelerated 6-year medical school where you go to both medical school and undergraduate degree at the same time. So when I started medical school at age 18, wet behind my ears, evolution was taught as fact on day one. And they were teaching me evidences that actually had been disproved 100 years earlier. And I didn't know it. I was unprepared. I was basically naked intellectually. And I just swallowed all hook, line, and sinker. And now my slow drift away from God accelerated. And honestly, I became the most miserable person at age 18, 19. I was rudderless, Even though I had all the freedom I wanted, I was rudderless. And then my pizza date came up. And this pizza date, Donnie, I'm going to have you share that screen, was at Minsky Pizza's Parlor, and which is about a block from the University of Missouri in Kansas City, where I was in school. I was 19 years old, and a friend asked me out for dinner on a Sunday night because the dorm doesn't serve food on Sunday night. And let's go up to Minsky's and eat pizza. I didn't think anything of it. But as the pineapple pizza wore down and we're getting through it, a lot of noise in the restaurant, then suddenly the conversation changed, and he asked me 3 questions, and I couldn't answer them. Now, just for a little background, when I look back at my life, I think I was a science geek. I didn't realize it. But in my high school years, I had an animal lab at the University of Missouri and had done research. I mean, what high school kid does that? I had my own animal lab, and I won awards. And then when I was in medical school, and by the way, this should scare the bejeebies out of every young man in this audience, that yes, you can have hair at your age, and look what your future holds. But in medical school, I considered myself Mr. Science. I was there on a full 4-year ride for science. And I've never heard of anybody else getting a science scholarship. But there I was, thought I was Mr. Science, and my friend asked me 3 questions, and I'm going to take you off screen. I'm just going to talk to the audience now, Donnie, that he said, Carl, at the end of the pizza, he said, Carl, you believe in the Big Bang, right? And the natural formation of the universe. I said, yeah. And he says, well, what do you think about the problems with the laws of physics not agreeing with the Big Bang, that the Big Bang's impossible? I said, what in the world are you talking about? He said, in other words, matter doesn't form naturally from nothingness. And that's the first law of thermodynamics. If atoms, matter, do not form from nothingness. And you can't create matter from nothingness. How could the universe ever form naturally without a metaphysical, godlike force creating the matter? I sat there silent, and the pizza parlor suddenly got silent, like in a movie, and all I could hear is the muffles, and I'm thinking, what? And then he threw a second question. I said, Carl, you believe that life formed naturally after the earth cooled down and the chemicals interacted and the first living thing formed, a bacteria, through the interaction of the chemicals interacting, lightning and things like that? Yeah. He says, that's impossible because the components of living cells, that is DNA, RNA, enzymes, proteins, functional cell membranes, these are the large molecules. They're not just like CO2 or O2. These have thousands of atoms in them. The large double helix of DNA, the globular proteins that get folded up. He says, that proteins, DNA, RNA, and functional cell membranes never, ever form naturally. They cannot form by themselves. It's impossible to mix chemicals up and form DNA or RNA or proteins. So if the four components that are necessary for life couldn't form, how could you form a living cell? It's like, yeah, I was dumbfounded. I was speechless, and I didn't. I'll have to think about that. I wasn't letting on to him, who I perceived as a Christian. I wasn't letting on to him that I was bothered by this, but I was very bothered because I should be able to answer these questions. And his third question is, Carl, the fossil record today, and now the number is 1 billion. He said 200 million back then, but the fossil record has 1 billion fossils. That's a lot of fossils. Why don't the fossils show evolution? In other words, all the groups of animals just suddenly appear in the fossil record without evolutionary ancestors. And I thought, I've never heard that, and it's like, oh yeah, that's true. The fossils don't show evolution. I said, I don't know if I believe you on that one. I knew his first 2 points were right, but then he prodded me as we're done. He said, I bet you can't prove that evolution occurred, even if you tried with all your might. And that bothered me. This whole conversation bothered me. It was like a pivotal moment in my life. And for the next 18 years, I thought about it. Now, I still was a physician. I was in medical school. I had to do that. I had to pay off my debts. I had a life. I couldn't just devote myself to these 3 questions from the pizza parlor. But I thought about them. I worked on them. I read books and just tried to figure out anything I could that would make sense. And I couldn't make sense of it. Finally, out of utter frustration, I formed a television production company. And here we are on the screen here. We formed this so that we could get access to the fossils, so I could verify what he said and just kind of make sense, because now I'm thinking creation occurred, but what do you do with the dinosaurs? What do you do with the millions of years? What do you do with, the fossil layers? It's just so many questions I couldn't even start to answer them. And so I did what every good American boy would do. I'm going to go form a television production company, Debbie. And she agreed to it. We thought it would just take a year, but it took us, well, whatever it is, the number now, 1997 until now. And 27 years. It took us 27 years to do this. And during this time, we're filming interviews on every topic, including human evolution. And that's how I was able to put this whole story together. We filmed like Don Johansson, who discovered Lucy, F. Clark Howell, who wrote Time Life. I mean, just a who's who list of evolution scientists. And we also worked our butts off. We really worked hard. Every time we had a vacation, and I was an emergency room physician, so sometimes I could lock out 2 or 3 weeks at a time. We would jump on planes and just go filming interviews. And so we went to, in all, 104 museums, interviewed 104 scientists, each experts in their field, either human evolution, bad evolution, whatever. We went to 18 universities, and then we filmed at dig sites, dinosaur dig sites, human dig sites, the most famous, Solnhofen, Sterkfontein, et cetera, et cetera. And we filmed in 15 countries, and we were in 5 continents. So we got around, and I put all that information together and wrote the book. And I'm going to take you off screen now, show you, is this book. I wrote it all up in this book. And basically, this first book in our series looks at the fossil record. And I wanted to verify what he said. And he was absolutely correct. And I want to show you why evolution doesn't occur in the fossil record. I'm going to go to my PowerPoint slide here. If you go to the lowest fossil layers and you look at the animals in the very lowest layers, and these fossils here are from the Cambrian or the layer below the Cambrian called the Ediacaran. These just suddenly show up, and they represent the 7 major groups of animals that are alive today. The worm phyla, the arthropods, the corals, the sponges, the shellfish, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem is that each one shows up without intermediates. And I'm going to show you what you would expect. In the lowest layer is this fossil, and it looks just like a sea pen. This is a living sea pen. This is a fossil. It looks like a modern sea pen. And here's the problem. They have hundreds of sea pens, and they have thousands of bacteria, but they don't have any animals on this line, animal A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Those would be theoretical intermediate steps. There's no half sea pen, and there's no, 1/4 sea pen. They just showed up. And same with the second phylum called the echinoderms. Here's Debbie standing in New Zealand on a beach with a stem crinoid. Most people don't realize these are still alive today. You can find the fossils in your rocks around your home. But here's a stem crinoid. Here it is. Here's a little stem, and here's the 10 tentacles. Here's the one from the Cambrian, and it's the same thing. The little stem, the 10 tentacles. It looks the same, more or less, and yet there's no ancestors. They just showed up. This complex animal type just showed up without any intermediates. And this is a bristleworm, and bristleworms are very important to my family, Debbie and I, especially Debbie. See this? These are like poisonous tentacles on this bristleworm. One day, Debbie and I were in the Caribbean filming, and she's helping me film, and she comes up onto the sailboat and looks like this. Now, my wife is beautiful, but she didn't look beautiful here. You don't quite know what she normally looks like, but this is really odd right here. And if you look close up on her lip, she was swimming, and the bristleworm landed on her mustache area or lip area, and she got stung. And the problem is the bristleworms are alive today, and the bristleworms are in the lowest layer, the Cambrian. And here's a drawing. Here's the fossil. They look essentially the same, and yet there's no intermediates of how you get to a bristleworm from a bacteria. They just suddenly show up. So the entire fossil record looks like this for the phyla groups. Here's the arthropod, and here's a sponge, a recreation of a sponge from the Cambrian. This looks like the sponges we saw in the Caribbean when we were diving, both of these sponges. And yet they just showed up, no intermediates between a bacteria and the sponge. And that's the 7 groups. And that's a pretty stunning thing. And it's not just the groups, but even within the groups of like the vertebrates, like this is dinosaur evolution according to the Chicago Field Museum. But we did the interviews to find out that there are no intermediates on this chart. if you put the numbers in, it looks ridiculous that these dinosaurs just suddenly appear without ancestors. Same with pterosaurs. A pterosaur is supposed to come from a ground lizard, and there's no intermediate animals halfway evolved between a ground lizard and a pterosaur. And same with bats, and same with et cetera, et cetera. The bats are beautiful fossils. They're supposed to have come from either like a mouse or a tree shrew, and yet there's no half tree shrew, half bat animal, or 3/4 bat, 1/4 tree shrew. They just suddenly show up. But there are exceptions to these sudden appearance, and there's 3 exceptions that cause evolution scientists to say, no, even though we have no fossil ancestors for all these animals, we have 3 good ancestor proofs, which is odd. All the animals and you only have really 3 good ones. That's very odd. And the first one is the so-called walking whale. And this is supposed to be the best proof for evolution. And it's like a dog-like animal evolving into a whale. But we had the opportunity to film interviews with these guys. And there was 2 men that found the 3 most important fossils, and they worked 50 feet away from each other. They were in the same office, and they found the 3. They found Ambulocetus, Rhodocetus, and Pachycetus, which isn't on here. And that's very odd that just 2 men in the world that worked in the same office just so happened to find the 3 most important fossils of the world. But when we interviewed them, we realized that the whole thing was not as they said. There was no nose area on the fossil, and yet he moved the nose to like a little blowhole halfway evolved, but there was no fossils here. Also, the proof that it was a whale, a walking whale, was the ear, and that was bogus too. And you can see that in our book, volume 1. The second scientist, his partner, his boss, found this one, Rhodocetus, and it was spectacular. It had 4 legs, flippers, and a whale's tail. And yet, when we went to interview him, he said he had no fossils of the tail, and he had no fossils of the flippers, and he made it up. And he says, I don't even think it has a whale tail. And the third one was Pachycetus, and that appeared on the cover of Science, and you can see that in our book too. And that one was made up from just 3 fragments of a skull, 3 fragments of a skull, and he made up an entire walking whale, and it turned out to be not. So yeah, the second best proof of evolution is the feathered dinosaurs. And I don't really have time to go into this in detail, but this is the oldest feathered dinosaur there is. And you have to ask yourself, that doesn't look like a dinosaur. It looks like, almost like a pheasant or something. And this is the oldest, and you don't have the evidence before this. In other words, you got this creature, it's called Archaeopteryx. Here's a fossil of Archaeopteryx, and you have dinosaurs, but you don't have in the proper rock layer a dinosaur slowly changing into Archaeopteryx. What you have is frauds, and you have fossils that are out of place, and you have fossils that are completely at the wrong time. And also you have modern birds found with the dinosaurs. And then the last proof of evolution, the best proof, is this, the humans evolved from apes. And that is considered the linchpin for evolution. And yeah, it was, I'm going to go back here. Excuse me just a second. That was my confirmation that he was right about the fossil record. The second thing that I'm going to go to take off screen sharing, I'm going to show you this book. It's called Living Fossils. And Living Fossils was my first big experiment. And this basically was this problem. And I'm going to challenge you to think about this. I'm going to play the devil's advocate. If humans and dinosaurs and all the animals that lived on Earth were created at one time, and in the Garden of Eden, there would have had to be dinosaurs, it'd have to be pterosaurs, it'd have to be all these weird and unusual animals. And then if there was a Noah's flood, shouldn't you find modern animals next to the dinosaurs, like dogs or hedgehogs or cats? And shouldn't you find modern plants next to dinosaurs, like sequoias and oak trees and things like that? And yet, when you go to the museums, you never see a dinosaur display with a possum at the bottom of the dinosaur, or a boa constrictor wrapped around the dinosaur's leg. So just right there, it would say that evolution occurred because the animals were different during the time of the dinosaurs. It wasn't a Garden of Eden type of experience where dinosaurs, pterosaurs all lived with the humans. So I was told, but I thought to myself, if evolution doesn't work by any stretch of the imagination in the fossil record, then there has to be modern animals found next to the dinosaurs. And really, this was kind of unheard of when I presented and wrote this book up. And we went around the world asking evolution scientists who worked at the dinosaur sites, have you found any modern animals next to the dinosaurs? Nope, 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 nope. They'd always say no, which again confirmed that evolution was true, but I just didn't believe it. And then we realized that they were changing the presentation of the fossils and renaming them, and that the modern animals have been found with dinosaurs in great number. Not every animal has been found with a dinosaur. I mean, they haven't found a lion, but they did find a hedgehog next to a dinosaur. They didn't find a giraffe, but they did find a possum next to a dinosaur. They didn't find a cat, but they did find a duck and a loon and a penguin. I want to show you how they did this, because this is important, why I was so tenacious about the human evolution piece. And I'm going to show you that in a second here. We spent a long time and accumulated this chart that these, Donnie, are the animals that lived during the time of the dinosaurs, and you can find their fossils: ducks, possums, frogs, albatross, avocet, et cetera, Tasmanian devils. You can see these animals here. They're just familiar with. These were found with dinosaurs, but they never display them with the dinosaur displays at the museum, it's a travesty. They should have, at every museum, they should have a duck next to the dinosaur, and they should have a boa constrictor, and they should have a possum, and they should have a hedgehog. And if they did, you would simply look at that display and say, well, evolution didn't occur. It just, the dinosaurs went extinct. That would be logical. But they have kept this from the public, even though we released this book, I think, around the year 2000, and they still haven't corrected their displays. It wasn't just those animals. All these aquatic animals that you would see in the ocean today, these have been found next to the dinosaurs, and they look perfectly modern. And these plants, like this sequoia and this walnut tree and these reeds and the sassafras tree, all look modern. But this is what they did. They renamed them by species, so you could never figure this out unless you spent your life tracking this thing down like Debbie and I did. Here is just one of these animals that look modern next to a dinosaur, and you can see that they renamed it. Here's the nautilus. They are alive today in the ocean. They're usually about 300 feet deep. And here's a live, a modern nautilus, the same animal, but this shell is cut in half. And you can just see the chambers and the siphuncle and all that. And here is a fossil of a nautilus that was found next to a dinosaur. And here is a fossil of a nautilus found next to a dinosaur cut in half. So it looks just the same. Now you can see that this looks like this. And if you had a close-up look on this, don't have the screen set for you, but it's amazing. But what they did was they renamed it. For example, this live one is called Nautilus pampilius. But when they found the same animal next to a dinosaur, they changed the genus and species. It wasn't Nautilus pampilius. Now it's called Cynoceras lineatus. And so if you just looked at the names, you would say, oh, evolution occurred. But if you actually took the time, photographed the fossils that were found next to the dinosaurs, and then compare them to the modern, and then compare the names, you realize they have been playing a game and changing out. And it makes me mad when I discuss this. So yeah, that was my second big experiment. First one was the first book. And finally, I'm going to come off the screen share. Finally, I started writing up my human evolution book, which just came out in January. And this is called, there's 2 volumes to it. It's called Untold Stories of Human Evolution. That's volume 3. And the 4th volume is 9 Categories of Overturned Ape Men. Basically, I looked at all the ape men that have ever been named, but then were overturned. And there was 232 species of ape men that came and went over the last 150 years. And I said, well, what happened to them? What are these 232 ape men? Now, most of these are mistakes. This isn't a fraud yet. I haven't got to fraud yet. There's so many of them. I had to divide them a system and make them into groups. Okay, I'll divide the 232 overturned ape men into 9 groups. What did they turn out to be? One group turned out to be, believe it or not, monkey bones. One group turned out to be believable ape bones, just ordinary apes, not living apes, but extinct apes, but they weren't anything other than just a plain ape. One of the groups turned out to be ape men made out of humans that were recently buried, like great grandpa, they dug up great grandpa's grave or Uncle Larry's grave, and they said, oh, this is an ape man. That was a whole category of ape men that were overturned. There's 5 ape men in that category. One of the categories was, which is this first book, the Untold Stories, is barnyard animals that were interpreted to be ape men. And these were, when I say barnyard animals, it's a little tongue in cheek, but they're non-primate mammals that were, when they found the bone of this non-primate mammal, they said, oh, it's an ape man. Like one was a donkey skull. And they said, oh, it's an ape man skull. Another was a pig tooth, which you know about. And, oh, it's an ape man tooth. Another one was a dog bone. Another one, or canid. Another one was a cat bone. Or phalid. Another one was a ruminant bone. So there's a whole group of those. And that was the next category. Another category was ape men that were buried during the Ice Age, ape men that were created by altering fossils, ape men that were made out of reptile bones, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to the end of my life, and this was 2 years ago. I got this book done. Oh, and hold on, this is important. Then I got the bibliography, 432 page bibliography for all the documentation. And I'm starting to write up the cover, the back cover. This is profound what I'm going to tell you here. I started to write up the back cover of volume 4. And I started to write that during the filming of this mini-series, that there were instances of fraud, several instances of fraud that we documented in the interviews about human evolution. And I thought to myself, That's a very weak statement. Who's going to read this book? How many did you find? Was it 2? Was it 4? And I didn't know, because up for the last 25 years, I had not focused on frauds of ape-man. That's not what I was doing. I was looking at just overturned ape-man. I didn't care how they became, overturned and things like that. I just wanted to know, what did they turn out to be? And as I started to, I said, okay, I'll count them. How many ape-man frauds did we document? And I counted. These are from the interviews over the last 25 years. And I counted, and I counted. And there's, this guy has 3, Johansson has 3, F. Clark Howell has 10, Amagino has this, 5. I started counting, and it jumped off the page, and I realized I'm the biggest idiot in the world. I missed the biggest story. My books are going to fall over here. I missed the biggest story in the world, and I almost missed it, that there were 150 frauds over the last 150 years in the field of human evolution. And these frauds are so widespread that it causes now the entire theory of naturalism to collapse. And I want to explain that, because it's a bold statement. Well, we know that the universe couldn't form naturally because matter doesn't come about naturally. So there is no natural formation of the universe. We know that an ordered universe couldn't come from a disordered explosion called the Big Bang, because the second law of thermodynamics says that disorder never yields order. It goes the other way. So we know that the Big Bang didn't occur. We know that the components of life and living things, DNA, RNA, can't form. So that's part of naturalism that collapses. There's no natural formation of living things ever. It's impossible. The fossil record doesn't match. The 3 best problems, 3 best examples of evolution, whale evolution is atrocious. Dinosaur to bird is very questionable. And now human evolution, having 150 frauds. And by the way, the frauds are only one small piece of the problems here. There's also 45,000 ape-man tools that were overturned in the last 150 years. There was also 232 species of ape-men that were overturned. There was also scientists altering fossils. It's like this huge, difficult area. But when you find out that the frauds are prominent, and these are not minor frauds, then I'm sorry, I have no other choice but to say that naturalism is over. The entire sweep of it. And I would challenge anybody to just break this down with me and say, you can prove where matter came from, or you can prove how DNA formed, or you can prove that, the phyla groups, evolved slowly. And you can show but it's not true. And then when you realize that the scientists have been hiding their ape-man fossils, you still can't get in to see the ape-man fossils, even if you're filming a national television show for international television. They're hiding their ape-man fossils from their colleagues. Even their colleagues can't go in to see the fossils, unless they're a friendly colleague who's going to write something friendly. The fossils are fragmentary, they're hidden, plus there's all these frauds, and I cannot wait now to give you the first fraud, and then we'll go to questions, and then you need to have your friends watch this show, after the fact, and come back for the next show with Donnie and I, because I'm going to go through 148 more. I'm going to show you 2 frauds here. And this is the biggest news in the world. If you're a Christian, or even if you're a Muslim who believes in creation, if you're a Jewish person who believes in creation, Catholic, Protestant, it doesn't matter. You should be standing up and shouting and saying, woo, woo, woo. This is big. The theory of naturalism, evolution, collapsed. And you'll have to make your own judgment whether you agree with these frauds. Each fraud you have to judge for yourself. They're pretty strange. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start now with the first and only fraud tonight, and then we'll go to Okay, I'm going to come off screen share right now. I don't want to show the screen yet. So everybody's heard of Nebraska Man. And by the way, all my frauds go from the 1900s early all the way to current. I'm just giving you an old one because I think it's kind of interesting, but I could have just as well started out on the last 8-man fraud, which is Tumai, but I'm not. I'm just going to start with this one because I felt like everybody here in the audience has heard of Nebraska Man. Nebraska Man was in 1922. It was a pig tooth that was misinterpreted as an 8-man, and it came out. It was big news, and it lasted for about 5 years, and then finally, at the end of those 5 years, it was shown to be not an 8-man, but just a pig tooth. Well, that's a story we all heard. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that is going to make your toes curl. They announced the Nebraska Man in 1922. Now, you got to listen and remember these years. It's going to be 1908, 1909, 1916, 1921, and 22. It's the years leading up to this. In 1908, 14 years before they announced that they had found the Nebraska 8-man, which turned out to be a pig tooth, in 1908, the 3 scientists involved with the Nebraska Man, that would be Osborne and Cook and Matthew, wrote an article that said something like to this effect: at the Nebraska dig site, where they'll eventually find the pig tooth, we found a pig jaw called Presanops. And this is what they're writing in their article. And it's a very tiny little journal that nobody reads. It's just an internal publication at the American Museum. And in 1908, they're writing, we found something so strange here that everybody needs to be aware of this, that at the Snake Creek Quarry in Nebraska, where the Nebraska Man will eventually be found, we found a pig jaw, and it's odd. The premolar teeth in the jaw look like the molar teeth of either an ape or a human. So in other words, everybody be careful. If you find an ape or a human tooth or a tooth you think it's an ape man, be careful because it could just be a pig. Now that fact was established in 1908. They found it. 1909, they wrote that article. And in 1916, they find the Nebraska Man 8-man tooth. 1916, 5 years before they announce it. They look at it and like, probably just another pig tooth, put it on a shelf, and that's it. Now you can go to screen share. Now up and comes a creationist. And he is one of the most bright, articulate men you will ever find, even though he's portrayed in the movies as a buffoon. But if you read his articles, his name is William Jennings Bryan. And he's a creationist, but he's also the former Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson. And he's also a Nebraska congressman for the U.S. Congress. And he was drawing these crowds at everywhere he would go on the Chappaquiddy circuit, it's called. And he would give lectures about Christ, creation, and evolution. And he basically wrote that creation, the evolution turns the Bible into a scrap of paper. That was his line. I copied it. He's doing this in the 1915, 13, leading up to the Nebraska 8-man tooth announcement. Here he is, Secretary of State. Here he's running for president. Here he is, a congressman. And then he has the audacity, a creationist, not even a scientist, but a congressman, to write this article in an op-ed piece in the New York Times. And he lays out that evolution is not true. There's not enough evidence for it. And there's not enough evidence for human evolution. It's just fragmentary fossils. And this is 1922, just shortly before they're going to announce they found a pig tooth. He writes at the end of the article, he challenges the president of the American Museum to respond to this. This is New York Times. It's a Sunday paper. Everybody saw it. Now the American Museum president is drawn into this argument. And he wrote his response. It wasn't all that, interesting. And to me, it seemed like Brian had the better piece. But that was more or less the end of it. And then weeks later, I think it was just 4 weeks, I'd have to look up the exact dates, this scientist, Osborne, announces they found the ape man of the Western world, and it's this man called the Nebraska man, which is really a pig tooth. Okay? This gets pressed all over the world. Nebraska ape man, Western world, ape man of the Western world. And I'll come off screen share now, Donnie. And in all of their scientific publications, and there was many, many publications where they're comparing the Nebraska man tooth to other animals like humans, Indians, which is a human, carnivores. They never mentioned that the pig teeth at the site look like human and ape teeth. And they never mention that, I lost my train of thought. They never mention that they've known about this for 14 years. And that was scientific fraud, because that is the most important question at that point. Is this just another pig tooth? Because we know the pig teeth at this site. We've known about this for 14 years. And what makes this a solid fraud was that Osborne writes that the fossil was found just the previous fall. Just the previous fall. No, it had been found 6 years earlier and nobody cared about it. No one cared about it until the creationists challenged him and said, evolution's not true, human evolution's not true, we didn't come from apes. And weeks later, maybe a telegram, a phone call to Nebraska scientists, they shipped the fossil in, they announced that we found the ape man of the Western world. They never tell them that it's been around for 5 years and nobody cared about it. They only care now because they want to take down Brian. And they never tell anybody that they know that the pig teeth look like human teeth. That is two frauds. And if you don't think it's a fraud, okay, fine. I can't, everybody has to judge that for themselves. But that was so dirty. It was a lie about when they found it. It was omission to the greatest point. You can't leave out the most important point in your story if you're a true scientist. So that's it. So we have covered now in this lecture 2 frauds involving the Nebraska ape man. Next time we come back, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions now and next time, I'm going to cover 148 more. And if you think this is somewhat bad, the next ones are even more over the top. It's hard to imagine that all this has been going on in the background and nobody caught it. But because I was filming this mini series on human evolution, the evolution scientists who I interviewed, who told me about the frauds, by the way, or I'll say half of the frauds came from them. They didn't realize I was questioning evolution. When they thought I was an evolution filmmaker, and they just told me stories, and I just listened to them, and we have all this on tape. So don't miss next week. I'm going to turn it back over to Donnie. This is an important moment. I think you need to have your friends rewatch this video and then have them come back live next week. Donnie?
I love it, Carl. That is great. Great information. I find it funny that the artist representation of Nebraska man based on a single pig tooth, they were able to tell us what Nebraska man's wife looked like as well.
Yes.
Entire family from a single pig tooth.
Yes. And if you now look back at the fossil record and all the stories about evolution, human evolution, it's usually a single bone, a little bone, a piece, and then they make the full drawing. And you believe it because of the full drawing. we should not accept that anymore. We should say, no, we want to see the actual fossils, and we want to see the originals, because there's also a problem because the copies are fraudulent. Some of the copies are fraudulent. So yeah, it was made up artistry, and we kind of took it too easily. We should have been more diligent, you know.
Is it very rare for a researcher or a group of scientists, especially creationists, outside of the original discoverers of these fossil specimens, to actually go in, have access to the originals, and do their own study and research?
It ain't going to happen now. And here's why. There's 2 points of this. Like, we just did this Tumai. He won't allow his evolution scientists to look at them, at his fossils. So they don't, so even the evolution scientists, I can give you multiple examples all the way through history here from the 1900s. The evolution scientists cannot get to the fossils. And so if you tell them you're a creationist, well, you could buy a copy that, by the way, the copies are worthless, from bone clones, and study that. No, I'll be surprised. Now, there had been a couple. There was a dentist that got in, I think his name is Job Martin, and he got in to see some Neanderthal specimens, but it's very, very, very hard to get in to see the specimens.
Do you think that's why many in the evolutionary community and your apologists of common descent, they really love to look to the fossil record? Because, as you've pointed out, the fossils are very frequently found in fragments, isolated, very low confidence data that we're looking at. And so therefore they can tell all kinds of fancy stories. There's a quote out there, I think I might not say it exactly, but it's fossils are fickle, and they can basically sing any song that you want them to.
Absolutely. And they can change the dates on them. And we documented many examples of them changing the dates. They can change the genus names on them. They can rename them over and over and over. Yeah, no, the whole thing is so thin as far as the strength of the evidence, that if that's the best evidence you have for evolution, because whales went down and birds are so just weak, if this is your best evidence, and they would say it is their best evidence, and you know the facts that I have learned, this is why everybody needs to stand up and do a lap here and cheer.
Right.
Because this is so big.
I felt like cheering during your presentation, brother.
I'm so glad.
And I'm sure many in the live chat are as well. And so, especially at the beginning of your talk, this has been very introductory, as we have 2 more episodes to go. And when it comes to genetics, mutation, selection, the so-called driving mechanisms or forces behind evolutionary change, to take your fish to fishermen, to take your bacteria-like organism to biologists over time, they are inadequate for those large-scale changes. So genetics don't work. Then they want to look to the fossil record to save the day. And as you're pointing out here, the fossil record doesn't save the day for the evolutionist. No,
it's clear. If you just step back and say, okay, is this thing true? It's clear there's something wrong. This fossil record does not match the theory of evolution, period.
So in order of your talk, the things that you presented many good things. I think this was a good overview of what we're going to discuss, because episode 3 or video 3 is going to focus on living fossils. And so I was confronted or presented with your work on living fossils years ago when I first came into Young Earth Creation. And I was blown away because, Carl, the evolution, especially the most militant proponents of common descent, they will make arguments, as you iterated, that suggest, okay, dinosaurs exist in a very specific layer, and we don't really find any modern animals or representations with them. And you pointed out, and correct me if I'm wrong, in your presentation here, that we've discovered hedgehogs, possums, ducks, penguins
with the dinosaurs. With the dinosaurs.
Wow.
Parrots.
And so in museums or in schools, they don't present students or guests with that information, do they?
And I've been through these museums, like 104 museums. I keep looking at and I keep checking them. I just checked Los Angeles Natural History Museum a couple of weeks ago through a friend photographing for me. No, they have not fixed this problem, even though we pointed it out, I don't know, 20 years ago now.
Wow. And so it kind of takes away their, in many ways, their ordering of the fossil record argument, because they'll say, well, evolution has to be true because at the lowest layers you find certain examples, right? Simpler organisms to more complex, but that's not an accurate representation of what we find in the fossil record, is it, Carl?
Right, because I just showed you on this PowerPoint, these are from the lowest layer. There should be nothing modern looking in the lowest layer. And yet this looks like a modern sea pen. This looks like a modern bristleworm. It's the lowest layer, the lowest layer of
the Cambrian. Yeah.
The Cambrian and Precambrian. The echinoderm looks the same, and the sponges look the same. So the lowest layer, no, it's something is wrong here.
So in the Cambrian and the Precambrian, we basically find this sudden appearance of all this phyla, these sophisticated systems and body plans, coral, jellyfish, trilobite with their highly complex eye system, these massively different kinds of organisms. And yet they pop up out of nowhere with no evolutionary precursors.
That's right. And the reason why evolutionists got confused about all of this is they looked in the wrong direction. See, if you go to any layer and just say, oh, wow, look at this extinct animal. That's so crazy, a dinosaur or, a trilobite. But if you just move your eyes over to the other piece of the slab at any layer, oh, look, here's a modern, and a modern. If you look at any layer and just focus on just the extinct animals, you think evolution occurred. If you look at the modern animals, you say, this isn't evolution, this is extinction. These animals went extinct, or some of these animals went extinct. Yeah. So I understand why they made the mistake.
Right.
They focused on extinct animals and they made this big hoopla about dinosaurs and the Precambrian, and they'd always show you the weirdest animals because 90% of the animals that have ever lived on the earth have gone extinct. So you can go to any layer, there's going to be extinct animals in all these layers. But if you want to question it, look for modern animals, and there they are. They jump off the page.
That's amazing. You've done some amazing work. And so what's a good response? I've seen the critics, your proponents of evolution that don't want to tap out and admit that creation is a better explanation. They'll say, well, what we see in terms of your extant animal representations of what we find with the dinosaurs, there are variations. They're different species, so it's not the same. They've evolved over time. What's a good response to that, Carl?
That you're changing the species names, and I want to see if I can pull this back up. You're changing the species names because it's just a quick reminder what we did. But look at this. This is the same animal, but they would say it's different, but it's not different. It's the same animal. They changed the species. I want to show you one more. Here is a dawn redwood, and it's at our botanical garden here in St. Louis. This is a modern dawn redwood limb or branch, and here's a branch fossil found next to a dinosaur. They look exactly the same, and yet they changed the species name. So that's why. Now, there could be different species, but they're so close that a lot of these are no more different than the difference between a Chihuahua and a Beagle, which is the same species.
Right.
But evolution scientists tend to split the species, and they could make 100 different animal types out of dogs, but it's not true. Dogs are just one species, Canis familiaris,
Are we able to zoom in? There's just a couple people in the chat wondering if we can zoom in just to that picture there with the specific, if not, that's okay, Carl.
Yeah.
But you have such great,
I had my guy that was going to help me with all this, and all this is so new because the books just came out and I haven't really been going around talking that, this is a poor presentation audiovisually, but it's about as good as
you're doing a great job.
It's about as good as I could throw together. By the way, Here's this dawn
Wow.
redwood, the sequoia, metasequoia. Here's the modern cone that you find at the bottom of this tree. And here's the fossil cone next to a dinosaur. And this looks perfect in the book. This is all fuzzy because it's a poor presentation on my part, but you get the sense that this is this. I mean, it's so
Right.
cool.
Yeah. It's the same thing.
But look at this. Look at, you can't even read the name, but in the red, you can see that they changed the species name of the fossil. So I can't say that all the fossils that look modern are actually the same species as modern, but I have enough doubt to say the theory
Absolutely.
of evolution has collapsed.
Well, even today, in extant or non-extinct species, we find, as you've pointed out, a lot of diversity. We oftentimes find more diversity within the same species that they label species than across species, Carl. That's in coexisting creatures today. And so in the fossil record, there's a little bit of variation when we compare that which is extinct to today, or just even those creatures that aren't extinct, because as a creationist, within 4,500 years since the flood anyways, we would expect a little bit of variation, would we not?
Well, and yes, you would. But here's a good thing. Go to my second book called Living Fossils, and I'm going to show you variations. And you can see this in the video, Living Fossils. It's our second book, second video. We took photos of like 50 dogs skull. And you compare like a Chihuahua skull to a Great Dane skull to a Beagle skull. They're so wildly different. Yet you know they're the same species because they can interbreed. So a lot of what they call evolution is just variation within species. Yeah, there's some genetic drift and some genetic bad stuff that comes in, but you don't necessarily have to go there first. You can just say there's variation within a species, lots of it, as we can just see around the world with humans too.
Right. We find a continuum between these various animals, dogs, bears, horses. And so most of these so-called transitional forms put forth by these evolutionists can essentially, as you put it, fit within the variation that I would argue is found in biblical kinds.
That's right.
The pre and post flood diversity. And so when these evolutionists argue or put forth this challenge, why don't we find humans and dinosaurs together? But you've shown many living fossil representations. Coelacanth is a big one that comes to mind too. Okay, well, we don't find coelacanth and whales in the same layers together, but we understand that they live together. They find coelacanth supposedly a few 100 million years ago. Nothing up to this point, but yet they're swimming around in the ocean today. So would you argue that that's pretty fallacious reasoning from the evolutionists, Carl?
Could you repeat it? Repeat the fallacious point that they made?
Yeah, with for example, coelacanth. That's a living fossil that goes along with a lot of the fossils that you have today. And so we find coelacanth today swimming around in the ocean that exists today with humans, with whales. But yet the evolutionary community, they assume coelacanth went extinct, I think a few 100 million years ago, at least.
65. I think they thought it was extinct 65 million years ago. Yeah. Yeah. And then it's just absent. I think at the heart of your question is, why don't we find every animal that's alive today, including humans, next to the dinosaurs? That's kind of the rephrasing of your question. Yeah. And here's the reason. Dinosaurs, they found 100,000 dinosaur, different animals, but 3,000 of them were articulated. But a lot of them were just single bones, single T-Rex bone. So let's just say there's 100,000 dinosaurs. If you take the dinosaurs and spread them out over the entire landmass, and how many square miles is it? It's something like one dinosaur bone every 27,000 square miles. It's some huge number. So to think that you're going to find a rabbit in that next to that dinosaur, or a human next to a dinosaur, the odds are incredibly low, right? Because the number of like dinosaurs is low. And then also you have this, what I call herding of dinosaurs. The dinosaurs aren't spread out evenly. most of them are buried in herds, so then it becomes even greater mass of land that each herd is in. And, if the humans only lived in Iraq or Iran or Mesopotamia, and, then after Genesis 1, and then they started to spread, but they never got out of the Middle East, you would not find a single human next to a dinosaur ever, because the dinosaurs are in North America, where they're at, South America, Africa, Asia, but I'm not familiar with dinosaurs in Middle East, but there probably is. But in other words, the humans were in the Middle East, and all the dinosaurs that we find, all the dig sites, you would not expect to find a human at any of those sites, because humans weren't jumping on planes after, the fall and coming over to North America to look at the dinosaurs. There was no technology. Humans were kind of just slowly spreading out from Mesopotamia, in my guess. And so you wouldn't expect any humans next to the dinosaurs. Same with, you might not find, tropical animals from a certain environment next to the dinosaurs, but you would expect to find something that was modern, because there's 1 billion fossils and 900 million of the fossils in museums are invertebrates. You would expect to find some invertebrates that are modern next to the dinosaurs. That's what I predicted, and that's what I found.
I discovered it.
Yeah, and I never predicted I would find them all, and you don't expect to find them all. The fossil record is just too spread out,
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a confirmed prediction. You didn't know what the answer would be. You made that prediction based on creationist starting points, and you made that amazing discovery. We should all be cheering, Carl.
I'm sorry, we should all what?
Be cheering. Like you said, we should be cheering.
And it was more dark than that. I felt like a dang fool just going around asking this question, did you find any modern animals? I kept saying they have to be here if creation is true. Right. I said they have to be something, and it was no. I felt like a fool because it was all dark. I knew of no modern species of modern animals next to dinosaurs, and they would say no modern species, but yet there was a crawfish at the dig site, or a lobster.
Very exciting. And I'm just brainstorming here, but in light of everything that you're saying here, and you have excellent answers, very understandable. I appreciate that, Carl, the way you break it down for myself and the audience. And so from the biblical starting point, God creates two people, Adam and Eve. Humans start expanding, growing over time, but he creates populations of animals in fully working ecosystems. And so would we not expect to find billions of fossils of animals, with some of them coexisting, modern and extinct, but very few human?
Yeah.
Because they only started at 2.
That's right. And you would think God had a majestic, palate. And when he said, let's make some long-necked dinosaurs, that he didn't just put 2 out, in Argentina. Right. He put, 50 of them, like in the movie Jurassic Park, just the beauty of it, and it's, I just can't imagine him just making 2 bluebirds, no, right. So we have 2 humans starting, that slow reproduction rate. And then, but everything else is starting out at thousands or tens of thousands,
yes,
100,000 herring, yeah, It's a very important point, Donnie. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we've had a lot of audience engagement. We've had over 70 people enjoying this live the whole time. So you're keeping everybody's attention. Carl, we got a good mix, as well as usual here, of critics and non-critics. We like when our critics show up because we want to plant some seeds and hopefully win some souls. And so here's a question comes in from Born Again RN. This is Steve. Steve, I appreciate your question, brother. And so he's asking, Carl, have you heard the claim that Darwin said if his theory of evolution could not be proven in 100 years, it should be discarded? Or is that an urban legend?
I think that's an urban legend. I've never heard it, so I would say urban legend, but I don't know, but I've never heard it.
I think so. Yeah, I haven't heard that either. And so he's got a follow-up here. If human evolution is true, since we've observed animal speciation in recent history, why haven't we seen human speciation throughout 6,000 years of human history?
So it's a loaded question, but it goes down, Steve, to this, is that if you asked to see what a human skull looks like, the evolution scientists will pull out a European skull. And that's not true. I mean, it's true, but it's not true. If you ask me, what does a human skull look like? I would say, look at all these skulls. And these are in my book 4, okay? Here's a skull of somebody from Australia, an Aborigine. Here's somebody from the islands. Here's somebody from Alaska. Here's somebody from, so there is this huge variation in human anatomy similar to the dogs, but most people are not aware of it. In fact, there's humans in Europe living today with large brow ridges like Neanderthal. And there's humans living today with large brow ridges and a flat receding forehead like, Homo erectus. So really there's the variation within a species is so powerful once you understand that. And please start by looking at my dog thing, that really it just could all be variation. When people are saying there is, the animals are changing, it could just be they're just changing with their variation that they already had. I'd have to be convinced of that.
Amen. So what are your thoughts when certain groups want to label human variations such as Neanderthals as a different species simply because of the differences in morphology, some of the differences that you've talked about, like the brow ridge, the occipital bun?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you a story. When we went and we filmed at three Neanderthal sites, Mettmann, Germany, where the first one was. We were also at Le Chapelle Saints in France, and I think one other. And at Mettmann, Germany, where they where they announced the first skull cap, there had actually been a couple found before that in 1838. But in 1859, I think it was, they found the first skull cap in Mettmann, Germany, and that's kicked off this Neanderthal discussion. At that museum, it's a public pro-evolution museum. And we interviewed, and we filmed at the dig site, and they call Neanderthal man Homo sapiens. And it's all evolution. I mean, it's 100%, 110% evolution there.
Yeah.
So they're calling him Homo sapiens. And we interviewed scientists after scientists after scientists. And those interviews are in our show and in the books. They said, Neanderthal doesn't look anything different than modern humans. And the scientists about the DNA would tell us, you could look at the DNA, the same DNA, different studies, and come up with crazy different conclusions, by trying to be honest about it. So I think Neanderthal man, Homo erectus are just variations of humans that are living today, Homo sapiens. And the reason I say that is I can show you skulls of modern people, and they're in my book, where you put a modern skull next to a Homo erectus, and you do 4 of them, and you say, which one's Homo erectus, which one's a modern human? You can't tell them apart. Same way with Neanderthal. So yeah, the scientists in the know are not impressed with Neanderthal features because they know that those features are in the human population today.
Excellent answer. And I, like you, I like to try and stay up on what the evolutionary community are saying in terms of their position, their arguments. And so I've seen recent lectures, Carl, that I've gone through from evolutionary paleoanthropologists, where they're speaking on hominin examples like Neanderthal, Heidelbergensis erectus. And very recent, they admit that Neanderthals are us, just adapted to a cold ecoglacial environment. There you go. That's from their own mouths. Same species.
Yeah, there you go. And if you wait till tomorrow, someone will give you a new idea, because they change their ideas every day. But yeah, there you go. And we interviewed lots of scientists that basically said the same thing.
If I could, I've done a lot of study on whale evolution, and I've been blessed by your work
Thank
and
you.
your videos and your interviews. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you doing an interview, if I'm not mistaken, and you were speaking on whale evolution in your introductory slides here, which I appreciate. And I think it was
Phil Gingrich.
Rhodocetus.
Yeah, Rhodocetus.
About the fluke,
Yeah.
where the discoverer had speculated that there was a fluke, but then eventually retracted that. Can you speak to that a little bit, Carl?
Yeah, that scientist, his name is Phil Gingrich,
Right.
and he is the guru for whale evolution. He was one of the two guys that found all the whales. And here is the video clip, but because my system is all just being thrown together, here he is in this clip when we're interviewing him, and he's saying, Rhodocetus, I never found the tail. So I used to think it had a whale tail, but now I don't think it has a whale tail. And he said, I never had the flippers, but I used to think it had flippers, but now I don't think it has flippers. And so he retracts it. And the crazy, uncomfortable thing is that we were filming that interview. And, you feel bad for these scientists because they don't realize how crazy they sound. Yeah. And you could see those interviews, and even our first video is still as pertinent as it was when it was released. It's a standard definition video. It's a green video, Evolution, the Grand Experiment, Volume 1, Episode 1. But I can't see it here, but it's still pertinent because those interviews. And if you go to our website, there's interviews where the guy implodes on the other one, Ambulocetus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just bad. I feel bad.
Well, I've got the sources here, the references, because again, I've really utilized your material on whale evolution and fossils in general, because I've got people asking for those citations. So I'll send it to them, and I got links to the videos as well. And so you also, I think it was Phil Gingrich with Ambulocetus. Didn't he admit or argue that Ambulocetus is not in the main lineage because its eyes are at the top of its head rather than the side, much like a crocodile?
Yeah.
And so
yeah. So Phil Gingrich, was commenting on his roommate or office mate's discovery. Remember, the two guys found 3 of these things. His office mate found Ambulocetus, and his office mate said Ambulocetus is a walking whale. Mm-hmm. And then Gingrich, during the interview, says, no, it can't be on the lineage to whales, because if you look like at a sperm whale or something, the eyes are off to the side.
Right.
Whereas a dog or a crocodile, the eyes are on the top. And Ambulocetus's eyes are on the top. And so Phil Gingrich said, just based on that, it can't be in the lineage because the eyes are in eye sockets are in the wrong place.
Well, there goes Rhodocetus. And it's interesting because you made a point that they don't realize how, I mean, for lack of better words, silly they sound, because they're presupposing evolution. Evolution must be true. Evolution's true. We're just trying to figure out the story, right? How it occurred. But us as creationists, we see what they're saying in terms of, well, it's not in the main lineage. Well, it's not in a lineage at all, because whales simply didn't evolve from mammalian tetrapods like a Pakicetus or Indohyus.
That's right.
Wow, you've done some great work, Carl. I'm really excited about this series. So we got a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Time has flown by with you, Carl, and I really appreciate your time and endurance here. This is a very
I could talk about this all day long.
Yeah, me too. I live for it, brother. So Andrew Cumming here has a question, and actually this wasn't the one here. Trying to keep the questions in line with what you presented. And so he's asking, is Carl aware of animal fossils, including sponges, that are in strata dated earlier than the Cambrian?
You know what? That does not surprise me. I think I have seen some articles about that, but I am not up to speed on that. That would not be considered my area of expertise. But it wouldn't be surprising that you would have animals below the Cambrian, and then the layer below that, the Ediacaran, that you find something else down here besides bacteria, because like, where did all these animals come from? And it's a flood. You'd expect animals to be in all the layers.
Exactly.
So I don't, Andrew, I would guess you know something and it's probably correct. It doesn't sound off, you know.
I don't see how an evolutionist can make a case, though, for the Cambrian phyla, these body plans, trilobite being one of them, jellyfish, so on and so forth, shellfish, how they could evolve, though, from these precursors found lower than the Cambrian. Because are they saying that within that relatively short amount of time, according to the evolutionary timescale, these creatures evolved from bacteria and sponges? Is that what they're trying to say?
Well, they're saying that they evolved from a bacteria.
Yeah.
And, you know, and wow, that's quite the change. A bacteria, you can't even see a bacteria. You need a microscope. And now, by the way, that sea pen I showed you, the fossil sea pen.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see my hands. The sea pen fossil is this big. Like that's the first fossil. It's a foot tall. And the jellyfish in that same layer in Flinders Range, Eddy-Cairn in Australia, the jellyfish are this big, you know. You're supposed to go from a bacteria you can't see to that. Where are these intermediate steps, you know, for all of them, arthropods, you know, the trilobites, where are the trilobite intermediates or the precursors? Right. Yeah.
I want to see the evolutionary ancestors, I want to see that lineage leading up from bacteria or sponge to a trilobite. I want to see the transitions to the highly sophisticated eye system of the trilobite.
Yeah, it would be bacteria to a trilobite or bacteria to the sponge or the bacteria to whatever. Yeah, and you shouldn't be put off by that question because they have thousands and thousands of fossil bacteria, sheets of them. They're easy to collect, and I can show you pictures. I mean, they're in our book 1. So if you got pictures of bacteria, and you got little animal embryos, you know, that are just so small, that you should see, and soft, you should see everything all the way up to for every animal group. And if you don't, you really need to be asking questions.
Okay, like you said, from the evolutionary story, their philosophy would say sponges and trilobites and other creatures in the Cambrian share a common ancestor with bacteria. So bacteria to sponge, bacteria to trilobite. So there being sponges in lower layers lower than the Cambrian is no help to them, because now they just have to explain how the sponges evolved from even earlier bacteria.
That's right. And they still have the problem. Show us the bacteria going into that earlier sponge. It doesn't help them at all.
I've seen some evolutionists, they'll say, well, the sophisticated eye system of the trilobite, it's not that sophisticated. They try and downplay the design. It's not that complex.
Oh, yeah. It's not complex to have eyes evolve in, I think it's like 23 different animal groups independently. Oh, that'd be easy. Evolve an eye. Oh, yeah. I got some, bridges to sell you too.
Yeah. I want to see one of these evolutionary scientists design something better than an eye.
Yeah.
And so, here's a question. It sounds like people are hoping maybe for a sneak peek. Not that you have to, Dr. Werner, but people are excited about this series. So Lorraine here is asking if you could provide us a sneak peek of his next fraud examples so we can do our homework. I was going to say when you ended, 1 down, 148 more to go.
So yeah, we had 2 down because there was 2 at Nebraska, man, 148 more. And I'll just run through all 150 real quick, like in 2 sentences with you. And I'm just going to do it starting in New York City, going across the United States, going down to South America, coming up Africa, going through Europe. Okay. And I'm going to give you the numbers. So the next one is University of Chicago, the time life human evolution chart of, the small ape going into man. There were 10 frauds by Dr. F. Clark Howell, and I'll show you why I say frauds. Just hold on till I give you the presentation, but that's 10 more. The next one was Lucy. That's Dr. Johansson in Arizona, the University of Arizona. He had 3 frauds with Lucy, not mistakes, but frauds where he knew he was giving false information.
Wow.
Going down to South America, Buenos Aires, is Amigino Florentino, who found 5 recently buried humans, like great-grandma's grave kind of thing. And he committed 5 frauds, including telling lies, and I'll go over those. Then going to the tip of Africa, there's University of Witwatersrand, Raymond Dart. He committed 30 frauds. Now, you'll have to hear about his near-death confession that we recorded. We were the only one that have ever recorded it, to my knowledge. His near-death confession, as told by his colleague, that told us that those 30 were frauds. Then his partner, Philip Tobias, had 4 frauds to do with Homo habilis. Then his one museum over is Robert Broom with the robust Australopithecine. He had 2 frauds with the robustus. Then going up to the Leakeys, Richard Leakey altered a photograph of Homo erectus, the Turkana boy, and moved the face. And his father, Louis Leakey, misrepresented the human, the fossil called Zinjanthropus in 1961 in the National Geographic. Then going up to, is this too long, by the way?
No,
Okay.
I don't mind comprehensive programs. We're used to it here, Carl.
Then going up to Spain, there was a scientist there who found a donkey skull, and he was accused of fraud for altering the diagram of that. Then going up to France, the Marcel and Boule, who described the first full Neanderthal skeleton, he had 4 frauds, including moving the foramen magnum of the first Neanderthal skull. And he had 3 other frauds with Neanderthal. Then moving over to Paris, currently there's a scientist who found Toumai, who this is on display currently, and there's 4 frauds that he committed: moving the foramen magnum, telling a lie that the bone was not found, the femur bone wasn't found, telling a lie that it was found in rock, it wasn't. And then moving over to the England, Piltdown was not 1 fraud, it was 5. That's how I count it. You might disagree, but actually they had buried an ape man in 2 different locations and seeded it and created these bone tools made out of elephant bones. I counted it as 4 or 5. I can't remember off the top of my head. Then the last fraudster of all fraudster, and these are the most fascinating of the frauds, is Ernst Haeckel, 1890s. His embryo frauds that I was taught was true, but it wasn't. And it was proof of human evolution, but it was fraud. He committed 58 frauds and was responsible for ushering in this anti-Semitism. And he was responsible for embellishing racism. Racism has been around for a long time against Black people, but he embellished it with fraudulent diagrams of Black people. So there you go. If you want, I forgot who asked the question, but if you want a short answer, there's the 150. I don't know if you want to tune in now that I just told you everything, but if you see the pictures, oh yeah. Did I do the Homo habilis? Yeah. Philip Tobias. Yeah. So it's when you see the pictures and then when you actually understand the background of the story, it really stinks, you know?
I love it. That is awesome, Carl. I am excited and ready for another 100 questions for you for part 2, which is July 1st. And then part 3, I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to go look, the 15th. So, and time flies by. And so I have a lot of questions for you on Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, and Homo habilis. I'm going to save those for part 2 because we're going to be able to talk about that for a lengthy period of time. And so I'm just curious, and for the audience sake too, as we start to wind things down, maybe just a general answer to, so in light of these frauds. I find this very interesting because I didn't know there were so many frauds even associated with Lucy. So I'm really excited to see this information. How do we sort out the fraud with what is reality, what is legit with these Australopithecines? So as a creationist, how would we view these Australopithecine creatures? Are they just an extinct form of ape? Or I'm curious how you would respond to that, Carl.
I think Australopithecines are just an extinct ape. And you can see that clearly when you compare the Australopithecines to modern ape skulls. And we did that in our book 3 and 4. And the fact that they say that Australopithecines walked upright because of their pelvis, that was also frauds on Raymond Dart's part with his Australopithecus. It was a fraud by Robert Broom, who altered his Australopithecine pelvis, Mrs. Ples, and it was a fraud based on the pelvis of Lucy, which was altered. 3 pelvises of Australopithecines. And the whole reason people think Australopithecines walked upright, because there was a man in South Africa who worked with Dr. Broom. His name is Dr. Robinson. He said, oh, Australopithecines walked upright, and everybody believed it. And you know what? He didn't even have a degree in anthropology. I don't know what his degree was in, maybe microbiology or something, or plants or something. You know, and everybody just takes it. Nobody really questions it. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, though, it makes me look like a hero, because I can just walk in anywhere and just like, well, wait a minute.
You are a hero. Amen.
Listen, I want to make one last plug before you, because I feel you winding down. I just want to make an appeal to everybody.
Sure. Of course.
You know, this is not going to do any good if I just spent this life and this all dies with me. It has to be everybody here in the audience taking this and then spreading it, you know. And I would appeal, if anybody has kids, that you do our book series. It's a 4-book series as a homeschool program. And you go through the 4 semesters of creation with our green book, blue book, and then the human evolution books. Is if we don't teach the kids this, and what good does it do if the parents know this and the kids don't, and the kids aren't prepared? We got to get everybody to get this into their schools if they have some control over that, or their home schools, or if not, even if you have no control over that, you could still do it in the summertime with your kids. But it's imperative for us to pull back this society and start over, and like, okay, because I tell you what, the kids that go through our books, you know, as a class, they are rock solid, and they're like talking down the evolutionists, and they have all the facts, you know. So please, I appeal to you, consider teaching this to your kids and put it in your curriculum.
Amen. I completely agree. I've got my chat mod who is posting all the relevant links.
Thank you.
Here's the Grand Experiment series here. I'll make sure they're all in the description box as well, because you put a lot of work into this, and God bless you for that, Carl. And so we want to get this information out to as many people as possible. Here's the Grand Experiment DVD series. And so I'm just so fascinated by what you're saying on Lucy, because with the Australopithecines, it's not just one pelvis fraud or 2, it's 3. And so would you then argue that the evidence for Australopithecines walking upright, similar to humans, is pretty weak in light of these frauds?
I'm not impressed at all. You know, if you have a pelvis that looks like this, which is flat, I don't know if you can see that. How can I turn this? I'm not very good with the camera here. See, an ape pelvis, if you look at it sideways, it's flat. The Australopithecine pelvises are flat. A human pelvis, I have my human pelvis disassembled, but well, here we go. A human pelvis is not flat. It's 3-dimensional. It turns forward. Let's see, it turns forward 90 degrees. But the Australopithecine pelvises are flat. So I don't know how you could say that animal walks upright. Now, if you want to believe it, and you know, you can come up with all kinds of criteria and believe it, but I don't see it. I'm willing to have you show it to me, but I would like you to let me have access to the rest of the fossils. We only got access to 10% of the fossils, and we found all these frauds. If they would let me photograph the rest of the 90%, we could all just be done with this, huh?
Right, because if you only got a small percentage of the actual finding and the evidence, and then in light of the how drastic the minds have changed in terms of these evolutionary scientists over time, then it's, I think, accurate to be skeptical, Carl. So we're definitely going to dig a lot more deeper into the Australopithecines, Homo habilis, which is another big one in part 2. And so I'm excited for that. For those in the audience, get ready for that. I did promise Andrew here. The audience is just having too much fun, Carl. And so I did promise him I'll sneak this question in. People could probably ask you questions all day and night. So Andrew is wondering, according to our model as creationists, we would hold to created kinds. So in light of the fact that, earlier, anybody just joining us, you presented just some truly extraordinary evidence with extant creatures with similar morphology, at least, live like penguins and possums, and I think you even said duck
with dinosaurs, yes, and a parrot.
Hedgehog, parrot. That's amazing, living with dinosaurs. And so in light of that, Andrew is wondering, according to the created kinds model, what would we not expect to find together, I'm assuming is what he's asking, in the fossil record?
If there was all the animals that ever lived on the earth were created on day 1 or day 7 or whatever, of the creation week, and then they were mixed up in a flood. In other words, like a glow bowl on your grandmother's dresser, you shake it up and the snow falls, the snow thing. So you take all the animals on the earth, including humans, shake them up, and then just see where they land. You could expect to find any animal or any plant next to a dinosaur. You won't find them all. Don't think you're going to find them all, because the dinosaurs are too far spread out. But you could find a human. There's never been a human found next to a dinosaur. You could find, a lion. There's never been a lion found next to a dinosaur. But to Andrew's question, you would not be surprised to find any animal that's alive today next to a dinosaur. And we found hundreds, and that's documented in my book. And I kind of quit, like, what's the point? Oh, by the way, there's 432 species of mammals found next to dinosaurs. Most of them are little small things, and you wouldn't know what they are. But there's a lot of mammals with the dinosaurs. No lions, no giraffes, nothing like that. But there was a hedgehog, there was a Tasmanian devil-like mammal, there was a beaver-like mammal, possum. I want to give one more plug. Can I jump in for one more plug?
Yes, you can give as many plugs as you want, brother.
Since we're not going to be together for, I guess it's a couple of weeks. I don't know when our next meeting is. If anybody wants to jump ahead, you don't have to wait for the books to arrive. If you order them, you can watch and live streaming video, the last 4 videos in our human evolution series. And I say the last 4 because they go over the 150 frauds much more articulately than I can do, because it's all put together, the pictures and everything. But if you really like to get ahead, just jump to my website, The Grand Experiment, go to video series, and then you can see how to stream the videos. It's a click there. And I think you can rent them for $4 to watch the video from home, from your phone, or you could, buy it and then have unlimited access to it. But if you really want to, you could know everything I'm going to say in 2 weeks and see it come out of the horse's mouth, Mr. Ed's mouth. Yeah.
And then that'll give them an idea into what kind of questions they may want to ask. Yeah. And so a final question I'd have for you then, because I know the audience, people watching, always wonder, when it comes to any big finding like this, any new game-changing argument, like I think we've demonstrated tonight and will continue, in terms of what those that disagree are saying, critics, challenges, objections, have you found anything worthwhile, anything convincing in terms of opposing arguments to what you've been putting forth, Carl?
This is what the opposing side said.
Whole lot of nothing.
Nothing. It's and I think it's, if you ignore them, they'll go away, kind of a thing. No, nobody has on the evolution side has really stepped up and did a book review they should do the book review and video review and say he's crazy because these 15 points or whatever. But there's nothing, zero, silence, and I kind of expect that, and it's kind of disappointing. You want them to be engaged, but the way theories get replaced is the current scientists die. They don't get convinced. And that happened with, spontaneous generation, where they thought, mice came from dirty underwear. You couldn't convince the scientists that it wasn't true. Those scientists had to die, and the young scientists said, this is crazy. New scientists gets raised up. And that happened also with Galileo and Copernicus, their idea about, the Earth and the sun being the solar system. And so we should not be surprised if evolution scientists aren't jumping ship right and left. I would hope that they would reconsider their position, but they're so invested, you should not consider that one of them will change their mind, And if they feel like it's such a wrong argument, they should be stepping up and doing book reviews. I've heard of 2 book reviews are coming out, but they're both positive from creationists. One's coming out in Journal of Creation, and one came out in a Swedish Journal of Creation. But I'm sorry that I haven't been able to evoke a response. But it doesn't matter. We should be doing the dancing. I'm telling you, woo,
doing the cheering, the dancing. I am aware of one of those comprehensive reviews coming out on your book, a positive review. So I'm really excited to read that. And we're giving people some important information here. And this is only part 1. And I would say it's been thorough. We've had some excellent Q&A with the audience. And so for those who do have more questions, or more questions come to mind from now till the 1st, so July 1st, about a couple weeks, bring those questions, those challenges, and we will engage them. That's why we do these live. We want to interact with the feedback that comes in through the audience. So Carl, you've been a blessing. I've really enjoyed part 1 here. We have some support coming in. So Shepard here says, glad you were here, Dr. Werner. Blessings. God bless you, Shepard. One God Now here supports the program. $20 super chat. I appreciate it. And he says, thank you, Dr. Werner, for all you have done to uncover how evolution is sold to the general public. I have been teaching from your materials in Sunday school for 20 years. Praise the Lord. Wow.
Wow. That makes it all worth it for me, honestly. Thank you.
Amen. Praise the Lord. You're a blessing, Carl. So is there any final words, final thoughts you wanted to leave us with here?
Everybody also needs to review and study up on Sediba. Not Sediba. No, not Sediba. The one that just came out. Sahelenthus. Sahelenthus tashidensis, or Toumai, Toumai, because you probably don't know anything about it. And just look it up on Wikipedia, find out how it's the latest ape man, because we're going to take him down next time we get together. Toumai, Toumai.
So we're going to be taking down the Australopithecines in general, Lucy, Homo habilis,
Homo erectus.
Homo erectus. We're touching on them all.
Neanderthal man.
Yeah. We're comprehend. It's 2024, and it's a great time to be a biblical creationist.
It is it's like we're in the glory years,
Yes, let's take advantage.
Oh my gosh, it's such an exciting time.
And we get to broadcast to people all around the world, reach thousands of people with this very important information. So Carl, I appreciate all the work, time, energy, and effort you've put into your books, your video series, and now this ongoing series that we're doing here. So God bless you. To the audience, God bless you as well. I appreciate all the questions, the feedback. 2 hours have flown by. I'm already looking forward to part 2. I've already got questions in mind I'm going to ask you, Carl. So thanks again for tuning in, everybody. God bless. Share this around, and Standing for Truth is out.